He thought he took my home. He thought he broke me. But the minute they screamed, "Get out!" I remembered the true cost of my silence. This is the story of a mother who let her wealthy family brag about the house, right up until the day she made their $15 million palace legally and totally worthless. The air in the house, a grand, stone and glass structure perched on the edge of Lake Serenity, always tasted of money and a quiet, persistent chill. Eleanor Vance, the woman who had helped design every curve of the sweeping staircase and chosen every slab of local quartz for the kitchen counter, felt more like a draft than an occupant. The house was her legacy, a monument to a love that had once been as deep and clear as the lake itself. But now it was ruled by her son, Richard, and his wife, Clara. Eleanor was a master embroiderer, her hands still capable of coaxing silk thread into blooming gardens or shimmering constellations. Yet, her embroidery nook, once a sun-drenched turret window, had been relegated to a damp corner of the basement, near the unused wine cellar. Clara called it tidying, or making space for the modern aesthetic. "We simply can't have those dusty, old-world textiles sitting out, Mother," Clara would chime, her voice bright and brittle, like shattered crystal. "They clash with the minimalist vision. You understand, don't you? It's all about flow." Eleanor understood. Flow meant the uninterrupted movement of Clara's high society friends from the imported marble foyer to the polished mahogany deck, without catching sight of a woman who reminded them of a less glamorous, pre-rich past. Eleanor's presence was a smudge on their curated perfection. She was the unpaid maid, the ghost in the machine maintaining the house, watering Clara's prized orchids in the solarium, and cooking the meals that Richard now referred to as institutional. When Clara wasn't listening, or simply ignored altogether when she was. One crisp autumn morning, Eleanor was polishing a small, antique silver frame containing a photo of her late husband, Thomas, taken on the day they first broke ground on this very land. She was in the parlor near the fireplace, a room she still considered hers, though it was now dominated by a massive, abstract canvas that screamed in garish red and gold. Richard entered, not with a greeting, but with the cold, measured tread of a CEO entering a subordinate's office. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than Eleanor's annual social security check. His face a landscape of strain and ambition. He didn't look at his mother. He looked at the polished floor tiles. "Mother," he began, his voice dry, "we need to talk about the house." Eleanor set the photo down. "I am aware I live in it, Richard." "No, I mean the deed." He sat across from her, crossing one expensive leather shoe over the other. "Clara and I are expanding the investment firm. We're launching the Vance Legacy Fund. It's going to be massive. But to get the cornerstone investment, we need to show substantial equity liquid assets. The betrayal by family, like most poisons, was delivered in small doses. The house, Richard, has been secured in my name since your father's passing. It was his wish. It is my home. It is a liability in your name," he snapped, the veneer of civility cracking. "You're 78, Mother. Estate taxes, health costs, a sudden collapse, it all cuts into the capital. We need you to sign it over. A simple transfer of title. We'll set up a modest trust for you, of course. For your comfort." The word comfort tasted like dust. "A trust that you and Clara will control," Eleanor countered, her voice dangerously quiet. "You propose I trade the only security I have, the home I built, for a controlled allowance?" Richard leaned forward, his eyes sharp and unforgiving. "We are offering you a solution, Mother. This house is valued at $15 million. You signing the deed over will be a passive investment, a gesture of support for the Vance legacy. Your legacy, Mother. Don't be selfish." Selfish. The word struck her, a cold hammer blow to the heart that had sheltered and nurtured him. She remembered the sleepless nights nursing him through the flu, the thousands of hours spent volunteering so he could attend the best schools. "I will not sign it," she said, firming her resolve. The next few months were the long pain phase, a slow, calculated psychological assault designed to break her will. Clara began to refer to Eleanor only as the guest in front of Richard's friends, a term dripping with condescension. Richard cut off her cable television, citing budget constraints, forcing her into her cold room. Her beloved ancient rosewood radio, a gift from Thomas, disappeared one afternoon, replaced by a note. Clara donated it. Too bulky. But the final, crushing blow came not from neglect, but from a vicious, manufactured lie. One evening, Clara's 5-year-old daughter, little Lily, whom Eleanor adored, fell down the short steps near the garden gate, scraping her knee. It was a common childhood accident, but Clara saw an opportunity. The next morning, Eleanor found a police officer standing in the foyer, blocking the door. Richard stood beside him, holding a piece of paper. "We have filed a temporary restraining order," Mother Richard announced, his eyes utterly devoid of warmth. "What? Why?" Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat. "Clara told the police that you deliberately left the gate unsecured, that you were negligent and resentful, putting Lily in danger." "That is an outrageous lie," Eleanor cried, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "The gate latch is old. It sticks sometimes, and I was on the phone with the doctor at the time, nowhere near the garden." "It doesn't matter," Richard said, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. "We are going to be throwing her out. The order states you must vacate immediately, due to a credible threat of harm to a minor in your care. We'll finalize the legal eviction tomorrow. Get out or I'll call the cops to enforce the order." The raw viciousness of throwing her out, using her own beloved grandchild as a weapon, paralyzed her. The police officer, uncomfortable, avoided her gaze. Eleanor didn't argue. She didn't scream. She simply gathered her dignity, a shawl of steel around her shoulders, and walked silently up the grand staircase for the last time. She packed a small, worn valise with her medications, a spare nightgown, and the silver-framed photo of Thomas. In the lining of the case, hidden beneath a layer of faded satin, she placed a secret, the thing that Richard and Clara never asked about and never knew she possessed. A brittle, yellowed portfolio of documents. They were the titles to a small, private safe deposit box, and 2 original patent certificates, dating back nearly 60 years. For a minor, but foundational, component of modern industrial milling equipment, a family asset her grandfather had willed specifically to her, and which had been quietly generating substantial, protected royalty income for decades. She walked past her son and the police officer and out the front door. The cool, damp air of the lake hit her face. As she walked down the long, winding drive, her footsteps crunched on the gravel that Thomas and she had laid with their own hands so long ago. She did not look back. The long pain face continued, but now it was compounded by cold and isolation. Eleanor moved into a small, sterile room in a retirement hotel, the Crestwood, in a run-down part of the city, miles away from the crystalline lake. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale cigarette smoke. For 2 long years, she lived like a shadow, watching the news, her only connection to her old life. She saw Richard's face on the business channels, beaming as he announced the Vance Legacy Fund. He had successfully secured a massive loan, leveraging the house illegally, she suspected, with the forged documents she knew Clara was capable of and other assets. The pain was a slow, deep ache, not for the loss of the silverware or the grand view, but for the loss of the men she raised. Every success Richard celebrated was another betrayal, a boast built on her displacement. She felt the isolation keenly. The phone never rang. She was truly alone. She spent her days sketching in a worn leather notebook, filling pages with detailed blueprints, notes on metallurgy, and complex stress formulas. She was doing homework. She was preparing for her comeback. Her comeback was meticulous, cold, and slow-moving, like a glacier. First, she contacted a private investigation firm she found through Walter, a retired lawyer friend who still owed Thomas a favor. The instruction was simple. "I want a full financial and corporate profile of Richard Vance, everything he has signed in the last 5 years, and the structural engineering reports for the Lake Serenity property." Next, she unlocked the secret. Using the documents from her valise, she visited the bank and accessed the safe deposit box. Inside, not jewelry, but a portfolio of high-yield municipal bonds, accrued and reinvested from the old patent royalties. The total value, untouched for 60 years and compounding, was staggering, far more than the current market value of the lakeside home. Her hands, which usually trembled were steady as she gathered the papers. Eleanor hired Marcus Thorne, a corporate litigation lawyer known for his ruthlessness and his total lack of emotion. He was expensive, but the royalty money made her richer than Richard had ever dreamed of being. "I want justice, Marcus," she told him in his minimalist downtown office, the city humming below them. "Not the house. The house is poisoned. I want his reputation. I want the justice of truth." The massive revenge began not in a courtroom, but with a quiet, devastating legal action. Marcus Thorne filed a suit against Richard Vance for fraudulent ejection and emotional distress, citing the false police report and the manufactured restraining order. Financial malfeasance, challenging the validity of Richard's loan application, which Eleanor's investigator confirmed, was secured using forged documents claiming Richard was the sole executor of Thomas's estate, thereby controlling the house. Richard laughed when he received the papers. "An old woman's tantrum," he scoffed to a colleague. "She has no capital." That was his mistake. He mistook her silence for penury. Marcus Thorne liquidated the municipal bonds and used the cash to secure a preliminary injunction against the Vance Legacy Fund, freezing all its assets and citing potential fraud involving the collateral of the principal's family home. The news hit the business wires like a thunderclap, but Eleanor's masterstroke, the true core of her long, patient revenge, lay in the structural engineering reports. The house on Lake Serenity was built on a unique, complex shale formation. Thomas, an amateur civil engineer, had personally supervised the construction, knowing that only a specific, custom-poured foundation could handle the seasonal shift of the lake's water table. Eleanor's sketchbook contained the original, hand-drawn blueprints and the detailed notes of the proprietary, highly specialized foundation pour. Her investigator's report confirmed what she knew during Richard's recent, unauthorized renovation of the boat dock. He had used a standard, cheaper concrete mix, disrupting the unique foundation stabilization system. Marcus Thorne, acting on Eleanor's instructions, filed a highly technical amendment to the lawsuit, a writ of inhabitable structure, citing the structural integrity failure. The core of the complaint, the disruption of the proprietary foundation, had created an undocumented, non-visible, and potentially catastrophic flaw that made the multi-million-dollar house not only unsaleable but uninsurable. The house, Richard's sole remaining collateral, was now legally worthless until the entire foundation could be expensively replaced. A project that would take years and require specialized, proprietary materials. Richard's world collapsed. The Vance Legacy Fund was exposed as a house of cards built on faulty collateral and fraud. Investors panicked. His bank called the loan, with assets frozen in a house that was now a toxic liability. Richard and Clara were plunged into immediate bankruptcy. The massive revenge was complete. They lost the money, the status, the business, and the very house they had thrown her out of, now a useless, crumbling shrine to their greed. The final phase was the return of justice and dignity. The court ruled decisively in Eleanor's favor, awarding her substantial damages for emotional distress and financial exploitation. She didn't need the money. The royalty portfolio was enough. The true victory was the official, public declaration of their lies. Eleanor Vance did not move back to the lake. The view was now tainted. Instead, she bought a penthouse loft overlooking the city's vibrant arts district. The space was open, airy, and flooded with natural light, perfect for her embroidery. She hung her needlework proudly on the walls, beside the sun-drenched turret window she now claimed as her own. She began teaching small, private embroidery classes. Her hands, once used for servitude, now celebrated for their artistry. Her dignity returned not with a roar, but with a gentle, satisfied silence. She was financially independent, respected for her skill, and utterly free. She had chosen to build a new life, unburdened by the expectations and cruelties of the old one. The final act of justice was quiet. Richard and Clara, stripped of everything, were forced to move into a tiny, dilapidated rental apartment in a different city. One morning, A plain, unmarked envelope arrived in their mail. Inside was a single check, made out to Richard, for a modest amount enough to cover 3 months' rent and a small grocery stipend. The memo line read only, "A small loan to get started." The signature on the check, though, was not Eleanor Vance. It was simply signed, EMC Eleanor May Collins, from the woman who gave you everything. Eleanor never heard from them again. She didn't need to. She sat by her sun-drenched window, the city lights reflecting in her embroidery hoop, watching the world move on, knowing that sometimes the quietest actions echo the loudest. If you have a story of betrayal, of silence turned to strength, of a life patiently rebuilt after a loss of dignity, you are not alone. There is a power in reclaiming your narrative, in remembering what you are owed, and collecting it with grace. If you have listened to this story and felt the cold of Eleanor's rejection, the sting of Richard's betrayal, or the deep, abiding warmth of her ultimate victory, then you know that true wealth is not in the material, but in the final, unshakable certainty of your self-worth. Here, we don't yell, we document, we remember, and the story becomes the final soft subscribe message. Subscribe to SamiNarrates, because here, justice wears silk, and the silent strength of a woman is the loudest story in the room. We don't need to shout, we just need to remember.